Good morning, everyone. To Kanchan's welcome, I just like to add some guests who have just arrived. We also have with us Professor Sathireddy from Telugu University. Welcome, Sathireddy. And Professor Subachari, who used to be with SN School a long time ago in the folk culture studies. So we're happy to see all of you. As Kanchan mentioned, Professor Sanjay and I have joined the university within a few months of each other in 1995. Sanjay had moved from MS University, Tirunelveli, where he was already a professor, and I had come from IIT Bombay. Almost within a few months, Sanjay had to take over as Dean of the Sarojini Naidu School. And I think that's a story in itself to tell. I think Sanjay will remember the circumstances and all of that. Yeah. At the department, what was then called a discipline, although we all tended to be quite indisciplined at Golden Threshold at that time, there were just two faculty members before us who were there in the communication department, one of whom had almost immediately left for a Fulbright fellowship. As we joined, he had left. We had about 32 MA students together in both batches and an odd PhD student or two. The department, as it got redesignated some years ago, now has 11 faculty members, about 90 MA students, and another 40 or so doctoral students. So Professor Sanjay and I, as Kanchan mentioned, have been fellow travelers indeed for over 2 decades. And as my senior, he has not only been a friend, but also an advisor on a lot of important matters over the years, and he continues to do so. It's therefore a special privilege for me to speak about Professor Sanjay's academic career and his intellectual and institutional contributions to communication and media studies. Professor Sanjay did his MS in journalism, and I don't know if it's still the only place that calls it MS. MS in journalism and a BS before that from Bangalore University. While he was a student there in 1976, he got the unique opportunity to participate in a large research project that sought to evaluate various aspects of the iconic SITE experiment, the satellite instructional television experiment. He worked under the overall supervision of the legendary Professor K.E. Eapen, who in his own right has been an institution builder that many of us remember in the communication discipline. The interesting thing about the site evaluation that Sanjay was involved in was that it was the only site evaluation undertaken outside of the Space Application Center and ISRO. Right? Otherwise, there was a lot of research done in-house, led by Professor Vinod Pavarala and others. But this was given to Bangalore University, and in many ways it was the first such initiative in the communication discipline in India to adopt anthropological research methods. A lot of field work, ethnography was involved in that work. Sanjay himself, as a young communication student, worked in 2 villages in Gulbarga and Bijapur districts of Karnataka, doing both process evaluation as well as summative evaluation of site. Especially the part that he was working on was in relation to the teacher training components of the experiment. And that turned out to be his master's thesis as well. Incidentally, some of the students here who know of Srinivas Melkote was another student in his cohort who also worked on other aspects of site evaluation. After graduating from Bangalore University, he worked for a year with another well-known figure, Professor Shanmugam, at IIM Bangalore, where he joined in conducting a detailed content analysis of development news. And I think the beginnings of the interest in development communication, development journalism was shown there. In fact, an interest in development communication that persisted as years later he was to guide a PhD student thesis on news coverage of farmers' movement in Uttar Pradesh. In 1978, he joined Madras University as a lecturer under the leadership of the redoubtable Professor Sadasivan, who was the founder head of department. I think he passed away only a few years ago, I think in 2015 or so. In 1984, with encouragement from Professor Epen, Professor Sanjay went on leave from Madras University to do his PhD at Simon Fraser University in Canada. SFU in the 1980s, as in many ways even now, as some of the communication scholars here will know, was one of the important places to study political economy of communication, with preeminent scholars like William Melody, Bill Melody, and Dallas Smythe. By early 1980s, Melody had already written about communication and information industries, and about the Canadian direct broadcast satellites, and about deregulation of television. He had testified before the Congress and so on. I mean, quite a well-known figure in that field. Then there was Dallas Smythe, who believed that research should be used to develop knowledge that could be applied to policies in support of public interest against private capital. Smythe again was very involved in many of those congressional debates and so on. In fact, his ideas on what he called the audience commodity is something that some of you know quite, those of you who do audience studies, looking at television audiences and all that, you know that concept. And Smythe, interestingly, I mean, just to give a little bit of historical context, he was in the US and he was made a target of McCarthyist attacks in the 1960s, and he moved out of US, came to Canada, worked elsewhere before joining SFU in the early 1970s. So, I mean, the reason I'm giving you this sort of context is that was the heady atmosphere of Simon Fraser University into which Sanjay walked, seeking to study institutional relationships in communication technology transfer with a case study of the Indian National Satellite System, INSAT, which of course Melody appreciated with his own interest in studying the broadcast system and the satellite system in Canada. And it was under the supervision of Bill Melody. In the thesis for which he was awarded the PhD in 1989, Sanjay tried to bring together issues related to imperialist control of allocation of resources, the politics of the electromagnetic spectrum, and the communication plans and priorities of non-Western societies. In his cohort of graduate students, some senior to him and some in the master's program, included scholars like Robin Mansell, who is well known for global communication policy work, who is now at London School of Economics. It also included people like Rohan Samarjeeva, who very well known Sri Lankan scholar, who went on to head, I think, the Sri Lankan telecommunication office. It included social movement communication scholars like Dorothy Kidd, who now teaches at University of San Francisco. It included Amparo Cadavid, who is a well-known Latin American scholar now in Colombia. It included Shafiqur Rahman, the Bangladeshi scholar who went on to teach in the US and continues to do so. So it was a great cohort to be part of, and Sanjay was part of that political economy group that SFU had nurtured. On his return to Madras University, he became a reader and subsequently in 1994 moved to MS University Tirunelveli as professor and head. After spending nearly 2 years there, Professor Sanjay joined SN School towards the end of 1995. As I mentioned earlier, he took over as the dean in 1996 in a few months and served in that capacity for 2 terms until 2002. In fact, if memory serves me well, he was appointed for an unprecedented 3rd term, which he did not complete. The school was then a very different kind of setup with no heads of department, and the dean was the overall academic and administrative head. It was a challenge, to say the least, to manage the disparate academic requirements, and I must add, artistic temperaments of each of the disciplines and the major figures who were there in each of these disciplines. Some of you who have been around know some of the big names. He quickly got down to working with the disciplines to place them on firmer academic ground in a way that fits into a university system with systematization of course offerings in the master's programs, structuring of the doctoral program where it existed, and so on. In communication, with the early training received from Professor Epen, he initiated curriculum changes that brought in more theory and research into the curriculum, balancing the heavy focus on television production that existed from the beginning of the program in the late 1980s. Courses like analyzing television and international communication with a clear political economy approach were introduced. The development journalism kind of course that already was there in the syllabus got converted into a two-part offering, with the first one stopping with a critique of the dominant paradigm, and the second taking it forward into more participatory and critical approaches to communication for social change. Professor Epen had set up a faculty of communication for the first time in India, whereas departments of journalism were more the norm. Moving away from that kind of purely journalism focus. Thanks to this training and mentoring by Epen, and combined with the grounding of political economy, the institutional approach that he had received from Bill Melody and others at SFU, Sanjay moved to give a more academic shape to our program at SN School. The PhD program, which had become dormant, was kick-started again with stricter norms for admission and a more systematic monitoring of students' progress. Professor Sanjay has been a part of curriculum discussions from the late 1970s through the 1980s in various universities, including Osmania University, in consultations organized by Fulbright and others. However, it was since the early 1990s that he really turned his attention to communication and media education, to study it, to critique it, to talk about the way forward and so on. In 1991, he became part of the SARC textbook project with Professors Epen and Thakur. A report of the project found its place in a volume jointly edited by Karle Nordenström, the renowned Finnish communication scholar, and Michael Traber, who some of you may know as the Swiss scholar who was known for his media work against European colonialism in Africa, and also for his important perspectives on media ethics. It was jointly edited by Traber and Nordenström, where that work went. While one may ask what came of this project by way of long-term outcomes, kind of a SARC curriculum kind of idea. However, it is important to note that the SARC textbook debates were very much structured around political economy perspectives of over-dependence on Western scholarship and the lopsided economics of the textbook publishing industry. These discussions assumed a sense of urgency in the context of dramatic transitions in the media industry in the post-liberalization era, with the commercial media sector demanding a more relevant, quote-unquote, more relevant training program, even as an academically alert and sensitive department had to contend with new waves of theory, including cultural studies, post-colonial studies, digital culture, film theory, and so on. Even now, the communication discipline in the country is struggling to make peace with these contradictory pulls and pressures. But we can say with some degree of satisfaction that under Professor Sanjay's leadership at SN School, we had started to disrupt the normal, something that continues till today as the department expanded. I mean, every generation tries to disrupt the then normal. Yeah? So that's still, that process is still continuing, bringing in fresh currents of thinking. In 2002, Professor Sanjay had carried out a commissioned study by AMIC and IPDC UNESCO on communication, education, and media needs in India, which till today remains an important reference for anyone interested in studying the contours of communication education and the new and emerging challenges therein. In 2002, as many of you know, and as was mentioned by Kanchan, Professor Sanjay went to Delhi as the director of the Indian Institute of Mass Communication. In the 3 years of his stint at IIMC, he worked with colleagues who were keen to bring in greater academic rigor into the programs they offered, and Professor Bamzai is here. She can talk about it. Not only in the diploma programs they offered, but also in the many training sessions they conducted for the information service officers, bureaucrats, journalism trainees from the global south, and so on. It was during his time that the IIMC publication Communicator was institutionalized as a peer-reviewed journal. Some of the early work on building a rationale for upgrading IIMC into a deemed university was done by him. I don't know if the task has been completed yet, but some beginning was made by him. It was towards the end of his tenure at IIMC that Sanjay was called upon to work with the University of Nairobi and contribute to building ICTs into the media curriculum in Kenya. About a year after he returned, in 2006, he served a 3-year term as the Pro Vice Chancellor at UOH at University of Hyderabad, but continued to teach and be involved in academic activities. In 2007, I think some people were here at that time, he worked with UNESCO to organize a major South Asia consultation here on university campus to evolve a model curriculum for journalism education. Between 2009 and 2014, he served as the founding Vice Chancellor of Central University of Tamil Nadu, during which time he managed to build an academic and residential campus in Tiruvarur and supervised the beginnings of academic programs in various subjects. Upon his return from Tiruvarur, he again took up administrative responsibilities at UOH, initially as the director of the College of Integrated Studies and later for a 2-year stint as Pro Vice Chancellor. During 2012-2017, Professor Sanjay was the lead India researcher for a multi-nation BRICS media system study directed by Karle Nordenström at University of Tampere in Finland. On Sanjay's insistence, the project also took cognizance of media education in BRICS countries. Although the overall study was on media systems, they have introduced some element of the study of media education in these countries, in the BRICS countries as well. His BRICS work has also enabled him to revisit key political economy debates around the New World Information and Communication Order. Some of that work has now been published in international journals and edited volumes over the last couple of years. During the same period, he was also part of the UKRI-funded project of the Center for Media Studies in Delhi on supporting research and innovation in media institutions in India and the UK. So I can't end this sort of extended introduction to Professor Sanjay without mentioning his institutional contributions. And I'm not referring here only to the formal administrative positions he held in different places over the years. He has been involved in various capacities in national and international bodies on communication, education and research, including AMEC, the Commonwealth Association for Education and Journalism and Communication, and the Indian Council for Communication Training and Research, which has become defunct some years ago. He has been a member of a number of academic councils, planning boards of various institutions such as NCRT, UGC, and many universities across the country. He has also been chairing a number of NAC evaluations across the country. So there's little doubt that Professor Sanjay's prominence in national and international networks has rubbed off on our department, drawing attention to the gradual evolution of our program into a prominent center for communication training and research over the last 3 decades. Within the department, he has always been the first among equals, yet a team player who rarely threw his weight around, always open to new ideas and very encouraging of younger colleagues. As Professor Sanjay formally retires from the university end of this month, I'm sure it will only be a formality. He will have more time to read and write, I'm sure, and will continue to be active, teaching and researching in areas that he has been passionate about over the last 40 years of his academic life. His time will continue to be sought by national and international agencies involved in media education and communication research. We at the department hope that we'll continue to benefit from his association in whatever way he can. On my own behalf and on behalf of the department, I wish him all the best and hope that this One Day Symposium will be seen more as a tribute to his academic interests and academic life rather than, as Kanchan mentioned, as a retirement function. Thank you.